Humans were fucking scary predators. The galaxy had learned it the hard way. Even human kids could tear you to shreds with their nails and crayons. In a dimly lit room, two Voxari conversed in hushed tones. Wezen, the elder, his skin wrinkled from 1,000 diplomatic missions, turned to his young apprentice. Zephyr, you heard about the human boy who stopped the Krill-Zorgan war? Zephyr gasped. What? How? That war was inevitable. Yes, their border feuds were a ticking bomb, one that would have exterminated trillions. Wezen leaned in close. Until a human child defused it. Impossible. The Krill-Zorgan militaries would crush him. Wezen smiled wryly. You'll see. Let me tell you how it began. The Krill and Zorgans were at each other's throats as always. Fleets gathered along the disputed systems, weapons primed. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the first shot. Wezen paused, letting the tension build. Zephyr leaned forward. That's when a human diplomatic ship jumped into the war zone by mistake. Ambassador Boyd and his family were aboard, including his son Aaron, just 12 years old. Zephyr's heart pounded. A human child caught between the Krill and Zorgan armadas, an instant from opening fire. How had the boy possibly survived, let alone stopped the war? Zephyr had to know. Don't leave me hanging, Master. What happened next? How did the human child prevent galactic annihilation? Zephyr shakes his head in disbelief. I can hardly believe it. A mere child brokering peace between two warring empires. How did he even know their ancient language? Wezen chuckles. That's the thing about humans, Zephyr. Their curiosity knows no bounds. Young Aaron had been studying the Krill and Zorgan cultures for months, fascinated by their shared history and the roots of their conflict. When the moment came, he was ready. But what happened next? Zephyr asks, leaning forward. Surely a temporary ceasefire wasn't enough to end a war that had been brewing for decades. You're right, Wezen agrees. The ceasefire was just the beginning. Once they reached the neutral space station, Ambassador Boyd and Aaron worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the Krill and Zorgon leaders. They arranged meetings, facilitated discussions, and helped the two sides find common ground. Zephyr's eyes widen. That must have been a daunting task even for an experienced diplomat like Ambassador Boyd. Indeed it was, Wezen says, but he had a secret weapon, Aaron. The boy's genuine curiosity and respect for both cultures was disarming. He asked questions, listened intently, and helped the leaders see each other as more than just enemies. His innocence and sincerity were a stark contrast to the cynicism and mistrust that had plagued the Krill-Zorgan relations for so long. Zephyr leans back in his chair, marveling at the story. It's incredible. A human child succeeding where countless diplomats and politicians had failed. How long did the negotiations last? Wezen pauses, letting his words hang in the air. Zephyr leans forward, his eyes wide with concern. They plotted against the peace process. What did they do? At first it was small things, Wezen explains. Missed meetings, delayed communications, accidental leaks to the media. They tried to sow discord and mistrust between the Krill and Zorgon delegations. Zephyr frowns. But Aaron and his father, they saw through it, right? They did, Wezen confirms. Aaron, with his keen understanding of both cultures, was quick to spot the inconsistencies. He brought them to his father's attention, and together they worked to counter the saboteurs' efforts. How did they do that? Zephyr asks. They used the same tools that had brought them this far. Openness, honesty, and a willingness to listen. Aaron would seek out the delegates who seemed most resistant to the peace process, engaging them in conversation and trying to understand their concerns. Many times he discovered that their fears were rooted in misunderstandings or long-held prejudices. Zephyr nods thoughtfully, and by addressing those fears head-on he was able to win them over. Exactly, Wezen says. Aaron's sincerity was disarming. He didn't try to browbeat or coerce anyone. He simply listened and offered a different perspective. Slowly but surely, he began to chip away at the walls of mistrust. But the saboteurs, they didn't give up easily, did they? Zephyr guesses. Wezen shakes his head. No, they did not. As the peace talks progressed and an agreement seemed within reach, they grew more desperate. They knew that once a treaty was signed, their influence would be greatly diminished. Zephyr leans back in his chair, his mind racing. So what did they do? How far were they willing to go to stop the peace process? Weazen's expression darkens. Further than anyone could have imagined, Zephyr's eyes widen in shock. They dared to target a child? The very symbol of the peace process? Weazen nods solemnly. Their desperation knew no bounds, but they failed to account for the allies Aaron had made, the bonds he had forged. The Krill and Zorgon warriors, Zephyr muses, fighting side by side after generations of bloodshed. It's almost unthinkable. That's the power of human diplomacy, Weazen says, or perhaps the power of a child's innocence. Aaron saw beyond the hatred, to the shared hopes beneath. Zephyr leans forward, eager for more details. And Aaron himself? How did he evade the mercenaries? Gay smile tugs at Weazen's lips. With cleverness and courage, he knew every nook and cranny of that station, every maintenance duct and service corridor. While the mercenaries searched in vain, Aaron was always one step ahead, leading them on a merry chase. Incredible, Zephyr breathes. But he couldn't run forever. How did he turn the tables? With help from his friends, Weazen explains. The Krill technician who showed him how to override the door controls, the Zorgon cook who hid him in the kitchen's cold storage, the human security officer who taught him how to set a makeshift trap. Bit by bit, Aaron's allies helped him gain the upper hand. Zephyr shakes his head in amazement. A battle fought not with weapons but with wits and loyalty, and all to protect one remarkable child. Indeed, Weazen agrees. When the reinforcements arrived, they found the mercenaries scattered and disorganized, their plan in shambles. Aaron emerged unscathed, his legend growing. Zephyr sits back, trying to process the incredible tale. And the peace talks? What happened after the attack was thwarted? Weazen's expression turns serious. The incident was a wake-up call for both sides. They realized how close they had come to losing everything, how fragile the peace really was. But it also strengthened their resolve. If a child could face down armed mercenaries for the sake of peace, how could they do any less? Zephyr nods slowly. So they redoubled their efforts? Exactly, Weazen confirms. The negotiations took on a new urgency. Minor squabbles were set aside, petty grievances forgotten. Both the Krill and the Zorgons knew that failure was not an option, not after what Aaron had endured. And Aaron himself, Zephyr asks, what role did he play in the final talks? Weazen leans forward, his voice low. That's the most remarkable part. After all he had been through, Aaron's commitment to peace never wavered. Zephyr leans back in his chair, eyes wide with wonder. I had no idea the conspiracy ran so deep. To think that other species would go to such lengths to undermine humanity's influence. Weazen nods gravely, his gaze fixed on the shimmering liquid in his glass. Fear and envy are powerful motivators, young one. The human capacity for compassion, for finding common ground where others see only division. It threatens the very foundations of the old order. But surely the other species must see the benefits of peace, Zephyr asks, his brow furrowed. The Krill and Zorgons, they were on the brink of annihilation. Aaron's intervention saved countless lives. True, Weazen concedes, but for some, power is more valuable than lives. They fear what humanity represents, a challenge to the status quo, a force for change in a galaxy that has long been resistant to it. Zephyr shakes his head, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. So what happened next? How did humanity cope with these new threats? Weazen sighs, his eyes taking on a distant look. It wasn't easy. The years that followed were marked by a series of crises and confrontations as humanity's enemies sought to contain their growing influence. There were sabotage attempts, trade embargoes, even outright attacks on human colonies. Zephyr leans forward, his voice hushed. How did they respond? With the same resilience and adaptability that had brought them to the stars in the first place, Weazen says, a hint of admiration in his voice. They forged new alliances, found innovative solutions to the challenges they faced, and through it all, they never lost sight of the ideals that Aaron had embodied, the belief that compassion and understanding could overcome even the deepest of divisions. Zephyr nods slowly, absorbing the weight of Wazen's words. It's a heavy burden for one species to bear, he muses, to be the standard bearers for peace in a galaxy that seems so resistant to it. Indeed it is, Wazen agrees. But if there's one thing I've learned in my long years of diplomacy, it's that the path to lasting change is never an easy one. It requires sacrifice, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to one's principles. He leans forward, fixing Zephyr with an intense gaze. That's why stories like Aaron's are so important. They remind us of what's possible when we dare to imagine a different future, one based not on fear and division, but on hope and unity. Zephyr feels a shiver run down his spine at the conviction in Wazen's words. He opens his mouth to respond, but before he can speak, a sudden commotion erupts outside the room. Shouts echo through the corridors, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of... You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.